Welcome back to The Heat. For more analysis on the Trump administration, we're joined now by Alberto Avendano. He's the Washington Bureau Chief of the National Association of Hispanic Publications. From Seattle, we're joined by the president of Northwest University, Dr. Joseph Castleberry. And Joe Madison is a radio talk show host with Sirius-XM's Urban View channel and a civil rights activist. Thanks to all of you. Alberto, we were just talking there with the mayor of Laredo, telling us what a big impact a war would have on his city, that its economy depends on there being open trade between this country and Mexico. But let's talk about immigration and people. Almost every day, we hear these horror stories of people being arrested by immigration police, people who've been here for years, they're arrested in their homes. We had a case this week of a father dropping off his children at a school being arrested. What do you make of this?
Well, the first thing that, first of all, was a great chat with the mayor. I think he said, well, we have known all along that everything is nice and right and good business down there. So it breaks a little bit of the stereotype of everything is falling apart and everything is sad. That sometimes this kind of message that arrives from the White House from time to time. One thing it needs to be said is that democracies, or at least healthy democracies, don't engage in mass deportations. But it needs to be said something else. This is not happening now. It has been happening before in the last administration. Right. We have been deporting over 1,000 people a day, and it seems like we took it for granted. I think it's a serious issue that is borderline human rights, borderline the new civil rights issue of this century, and it's complicated because immigration is key for the fabric of this country. Right. And my problem is that we keep hearing about the Hispanic community specifically being covering this issue for way too many decades now, over 25 years. And you know, I see, it is personal. I see the faces of these people, and I see something else. We in American media don't talk about the reality of Hispanic Americans, which is successful, is American dream achievement, is joy, it is success, it is a prominent, important reality. We don't talk about that. Okay,
let me go to Dr. Castleberry in Seattle. Now, Dr. Castleberry, what do you make of this? I mean, these raids are tearing up families, separating children from their parents, and what kind of social impact is this having? And as Alberto points out, it is a human rights issue as well, isn't it?
Well, it's creating a lot of fear among immigrant families. There's no question about that. There are human rights issues at stake, but there are also rule of law issues at stake that can't be ignored. In almost all of these cases, people are being detained who have already been through the court systems. There are deportation orders, and they are executing due orders of law. So there's a conflict between human rights issues and legal issues here that will only be fully resolved with a comprehensive immigration reform, and a lot of us are feeling that we're going to get that done very soon, and hopefully this year.
Joe, is that the answer, comprehensive immigration reform?
Well, that's what everyone believes, but the problem is the answer is very difficult to come by. I agree in part what the professor is saying, but what we know is that there are abuses. Because, as Alberto said, there's an attitude about immigrants that is very nasty, very degrading, and which leads to some of the abuses. Let's take not far from here in Washington, D.C. We've had homeless individuals who have been rounded up. We've had individuals where people have had that knock on the door at midnight and looking for someone who maybe they had a warrant for, but then they would question an individual they didn't have a warrant for. Let me see your card. Let me see. And based on what? Basically how one looks.
And that's also a legal issue.
That's
to quote the professor.
Yes.
Yeah.
But, you know, as you point out, Joe, I mean, there are abuses here. We just heard of this case when an Afghan family with special immigrant status, they helped the Americans in their war in Afghanistan, coming to the United States. They had a visa to come here, to settle here. They were locked up, the whole family. There's the case of Canadians being told suddenly that they need visas to come to the United States.
And let me also point out, too, it tends to be people of color.
Yeah.
Excuse me, but, we do have something called the Russian mafia. There isn't a lot of attention on how they make their way into the United States. And that's really the 800-pound gorilla in the room that a lot of people don't want to talk about.
And also, let me point out that the message we are receiving from the administration is that, we are after the criminals only. I have heard that before, too. So there is nothing new here, unfortunately. At the end of the day, data shows that it's only 5% of those being rounded up that really are could be considered criminals.
And the Obama administration, in all honesty, that's one of the things that they really did focus on. They did take a lot of heat for it, but their emphasis was that, look, we really want to go after the quote-unquote criminal element. We think we know who they are, and that's who they focused on.
Okay, Dr. Castleberry, you wanted to say something?
Yeah. All of these situations are just consequences of what happens when you have a system where 12, 13 million people are living in a sublegal condition. And we're not going to be able to solve these abuse issues unless we solve the larger situation. This status quo cannot continue. I think we all agree on that. The answer to fixing these abuses is comprehensive immigration reform, and we need to be very serious about moving towards a solution. And I think President Trump is serious about it, and I think everything he's doing is prelude to the deal that will be struck. Donald Trump is a deal maker.
Okay, I want to move on to...
I hear that, but you have to be careful also because repression and immigration don't match, don't marry well. If you go back to the 90s, there was a Democratic president called Bill Clinton. He built a wall. A lot of repression took place. We have drones in the border and other things, and the 90s is the explosion of the undocumented immigrants.
And let me add real quickly, too, that the deal maker ought to look at some of his business people who we know very honestly, one of the reasons people do come here is for 99% of them is to find work. Isn't it interesting?
And they make a huge contribution to this country.
Well, but not only that, but isn't it amazing that we don't see heads of businesses going to jail? They're the ones that should really be arrested.
Okay, Joe, I want to change subjects now, talk about wiretapping. The president has made this accusation that President Obama has been wiretapping his offices.
He's crazy. That's absolutely absurd.
We're getting all kinds of very loyally answers and questions about this, but why is he making those accusations?
Because it's a diversion. Look, the president, he can't help himself. This is nuts. This is an individual who, by all practical purposes, we would all agree had a great Tuesday last week, and should have rose high. Then he wakes up with this so-called Watergate, Nixonian attitude that the president wiretapped. Now, here's my position with the news media, and I'm just a talk show personality, but I'm here to tell you, prove it. You're the one that made this, not even an accusation. You stated it as a fact. Then where did you get the information from? You have 17 intelligence communities that have everything listening to. So where did you get it from?
You raise a great question.
And I know where he got it from. He got it from crazy right-wing talk radio personalities that I happen to know.
Okay.
And you do not repeat them as President of the United States as a fact. You don't do it.
Right. Dr. Castleberry, there is no evidence. The President has provided no evidence that his telephones or his emails are being read. He's the President. He could get access to that information if he needed to.
You have to understand why he did this. I heard some of the others say he's crazy, but I say he's crazy like a fox because he completely flipped the dialogue. Last week, we were putting pressure on the Attorney General Sessions and others about whether they'd met with Russians and finding out that all the Democrats had met with Russians as well. Donald Trump completely flipped the dialogue, and now we're talking about whether Barack Obama ordered the FISA court petitions. So I think he did a pretty masterful stroke there and changed the dialogue completely in a way that puts the onus on everybody else to talk about something different. Now we're not so much talking about the baseless Democratic claims about whether he cooperated with the Russians to try to steal the election from Hillary Clinton. We're not talking about that anymore. We're talking now about whether the President of the United States acted improperly in surveilling him, which there seems to be evidence that surveillance was done. It was reported in the New York Times on January 19th that intercepts had proven that Trump people were talking to the Russians. So did that happen or didn't it? Is the New York Times printing fake news? Who do we trust on this?
And
the answer is we don't know.
This is absolutely absurd. This is not about fake news.
Not absurd at all.
Oh, it is absurd. And let me tell you something. The reality is the President of the United States cannot order a wiretap. And by the way, if in fact the courts, if they did wiretap him, that means there is probable cause and Trump then is in a hell of a lot of trouble. I mean, that's the reality. You just can't get these wiretaps.
No, it's not that simple.
And by the way, I'm not pleased with the fact that we have flipped it. The reality is we should be talking about, and these so-called Democrats that met, let's all be very candid. One was at the opening of a gas station, eating Krispy Kreme donuts. This was not some secret meeting where people, by the way, lied that they had in fact talked to the Russians. That's why people are in trouble. They weren't totally honest.
You know, Alberto,
I know you don't like it that the other side has flipped your dialogue, but there's been no evidence produced either that Donald Trump has done anything wrong with the Russians. All we have is a bunch of innuendo and secret bits of intercepts that the CIA has, and nobody's seen anything, and nobody's going to see
Alberto,
anything.
I want to get your view on this. There is a theory, and it is a theory, and it's gained some currency, that there is some kind of deep state that's working to bring this president down.
Oh, so
sure looks like it.
This all of a sudden is like the Trump environment has discovered that when you take power, everything works in order to get rid of you. That's American politics, for goodness sake. I mean, that's the way the system works. So my problem with President with President Trump, is that he sometimes is not doing any different from the other administration. I'm talking about the deporter-in-chief. But he's doing something that really hurts the democratic foundation of the country when he despises public service people, when he despises media, when he despises key elements of this democracy. So the disruptor-in-chief, which is what brought him
his very close associate, Steve Bannon, said his goal is to destroy the administrative state.
And he's a disruptor, and I am okay with that. The problem is that he's using all these elements that he blames others for using, like fake news, alternative reality, and so on. So these alternative truths and alternative realities can be very damaging for democracy. It's my only concern.
Let me bring in Dr. Castleberry. Go ahead.
Donald Trump is the master of hyperbole. If you read The Art of the Deal, he talks about truthful hyperbole. And that's what he did with accusing Obama of ordering these surveillance things. He knows that that Obama couldn't order them. He knows that the truth is more complicated than that. But in speaking hyperbolically, he flipped the dialogue.
Sir, maybe I am too conservative to accept that in the sense that I love institutions and I love democracy.
I got to get to one
the
final...
last thing you want is a president who speaks in hyperbole.
Okay, but I want to get one final point, and we've only got 40 seconds for this, Joe. Jeff Sessions, the United States Attorney General, should he keep his job? Because he told a Senate... At least he told the congressional committee.
I think he should keep his job until the investigation is completed, but I think it's going to require an independent investigator or an independent commission. And just to give you the background to this, he said that he didn't have any contacts with any Russian officials, no matter what they were talking about, but it turns out that he did. Well, then that's why you have discussions, and what you do, you call in the staff people who were there, and you can find out. It's interesting how one can remember the discussion with the ambassador, that you had meetings with Christians and that type of thing, but you can't remember any other aspect of it. Look, have an investigation. It should be independent. And then that way you call in everybody who's in the meeting and you'll find out the truth, hopefully.
Okay, that's where we have to leave it. Thanks to all of you for being with us.